The president of Cuba, Miguel Díaz-Canel, arrived in France as part of his tour of Europe to carry out an extensive program of activities and meetings with his counterpart, Emmanuel Macron. Also, 3 Palestinians were killed in an Israeli airstrike on their car north of the northern West Bank city of Jenin. And heavy fighting erupted in Khartoum and other Sudanese cities between the army and the paramilitary rapid support forces, following the end of a 72-hour truce. Hello from the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba. This is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, and these are the news. Argentina's President Alberto Fernandez called on the governor of Jujuy, Gerardo Morales, to put an end to the violence in that province and to respect international human rights. In a message addressed to the nation, Fernandez affirmed that the repression in Jujuy is inadmissible in the democratic terms and recalled the statements made by the international human rights organizations about the political crisis. President Fernandez immediately called on the government of Jujuy for dialogue with the indigenous communities in order to resolve the situation in the region.
Finally, I asked the government of Jujuy to summon the indigenous communities and other social players to find roads for dialogue in order to overcome the conflict that it has provoked with its anti-democratic actions. I want the governor to know that he can count on me personally and on the support of the national government. Whenever he calls for a dialogue, he will always have us at his side.
The Chilean President, Gabriel Boric, has created a commission to find a lasting solution to the conflict between the state and the Mapuche people. The presentation of the 8th member commission took place at La Moneda Presidential Palace and was attended and signed by all political parties, including the Communist and the far-right Republican Party.
The agreements that at first may seem improbable and difficult laid the foundations for a lasting and sustainable solution for the long-standing intercultural conflict between the Chilean state and the Mapuche people. We are not starting from scratch. Since the return of democracy, there have been many and very significant efforts to trace a path that will lead us to peace, tranquility, mutual recognition, and respect.
The plenary of magistrates of the Supreme Electoral Tribunal, the TSE of Guatemala, will decide on Wednesday on the use of the vote counting tool hired by 2 boards. According to the president of that entity, Irma Palencia, they will analyze the issue in a more integral manner. The TSE carried out 2 simulations, 2 drills, on May 11th and June the 3rd of the preliminary electoral results transmission system nationwide, seeking up to clear up doubts about the vote counting tool. In the U.S., Homeland Security officials ruled out that sounds detected in the search area for the Titan submersible are thumps made by humans. The submarine disappeared from radar with 5 people aboard shortly after embarking on an expedition to the wreckage of the Titanic in the Atlantic Ocean last Sunday.
Yesterday, a Canadian P-3 detected underwater noises in the search area. As a result, ROV operations were relocated in an attempt to explore the origin of the noises. Although the ROV searches have yielded negative results, they continue. Additionally, the data from the P-3 aircraft has been shared with our U.S. Navy experts for further analysis, which will be considered in future search plans.
You know, the noises, again, very complex in the ocean. You have to be an acoustic analysis and you have to have context. They're trying to put all the pieces together. The noises have been described as banging noises. But again, they have to put the whole picture together in context, and they have to eliminate potential man-made sources other than the Titan.
Let's take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at TeleSUR English, where you will find the news in different formats, news updates and more. Other stories coming up, stay with us. Welcome back. On Wednesday, the president of Cuba, Miguel Díaz-Canel, arrived in France as part of his tour of Europe to carry out a broad program of activities. Díaz-Canel will participate in the summit for a new global financial pact, where he will be one of the main guests invited to the forum in representation of the G77 plus China, which holds the pro-tempore presidency of the bloc. The forum aims to reach a consensus for a more responsive, fair, and supportive financial system, which will also help to tackle inequalities, support the fight against climate change, and achieve sustainable development goals. Meanwhile, as part of his agenda in Paris, the Cuban leader will meet with the Director General of UNESCO, Audrey Azoulay. And in France, a very strong explosion occurred on Wednesday in a residential area of Paris. According to preliminary data, at least 29 people were injured, and at least 4 of them are in critical conditions. It is reported that the explosion occurred in the building of the American Academy of Paris Fashion School. In this context, an investigation has been opened for the crime of unintentional injury with the aggravated circumstance of deliberately endangering the life of others, announced Paris public prosecutor Laure Becot at a press briefing in the 5th Afro-Descent of Paris.
An investigation is now underway as part of legal investigation that has been opened on the following charges: unintentional injury with the aggravating circumstance of deliberately endangering the life of others. I will stress that this charge was chosen because we felt it was the most appropriate on the basis of the evidence available at the time. There is nothing to prevent this classification from evolving, even if we have initial elements that lead us to confirm that the explosion originated in the building.
And the fire that broke out after an explosion in the building of the 5th arrondissement of Paris has been contained, announces Paris Police Chief Laurent Nunez.
At 4:55 p.m. today, at 277 Rue Saint-Jacques, an explosion occurred inside a building that houses the American Fashion Academy, in particular, but not only. The explosion immediately caused a violent fire. As we speak, and this is only a provisional toll, we have 7 victims in absolute emergency and 9 victims in relative emergency. I would like to stress that these figures are provisional, as searches are still underway beneath the rubble. We must therefore be very cautious about the figure, just as I am obviously extremely cautious about the causes of the explosion. As I speak, the fire has been contained, I would stress, and the search for possible victims other than the 16 I mentioned continues.
The International Olympic Committee's Executive Board continues to be extremely concerned by the restrictions placed on women and young girls to access sport in Afghanistan, which could lead to a ban in the country at next year's Paris Olympics. Afghanistan had already been given a warning by the IOC months ago, and the situation will be reviewed later this year.
The IOC-EB continues to be extremely concerned by the restrictions placed on women and young girls to access sport in Afghanistan, which have not yet been reversed despite the repeated calls from the IOC, and which run contrary to the Olympic values of non-discrimination, inclusion and respect. The IOC-EB will review the situation at its next meeting in October 2023 after the Asian Games, and reserves the right to take any further measures to protect women and young girls' access to sport, noting that the specific modalities for the participation of the Afghan NOC delegation and team in the Olympic Games Paris 2024 have not yet been decided.
Well, Each federation will be different, to be honest. Some federations, the federations are independent; they can make their own they can make their own minds up. We would hope that they follow our guidelines. Many are starting to do so. There are more plans for other sports as well. I think rowing as well, off the top of my head, is moving towards some inclusion. So I think it needs to be flexible because it's a moving situation. So I can't give you a timeline, but we will take a decision regarding Paris, which hasn't been taken yet. We will take that decision when the time is fit, and there still remains plenty of time for that decision to be taken.
The Prime Minister of Italy, Giorgia Meloni, received the President of Brazil, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, at the Chigi Palace, headquarters of the Italian executive. Hours before, the Brazilian president met with his Italian counterpart, Sergio Mattarella, at the Palace of Quirinale, the seat of the presidency, and later with Pope Francis at the Vatican. Lula and Mattarella talked about bilateral relations, the strengthening of relations between their nations, and the agreement between the European Union and Mercosur. Now we move on to other topics. Russian President Vladimir Putin assured that the land, air, and naval branches of the country's nuclear forces contribute to the world's balance of powers. The president pointed out that the weapons of Russian nuclear triad make it possible to effectively and reliably ensure strategic deterrence. Putin emphasized that this is the result of years of work of enterprises, workers, engineers, and civilians.
Oddly enough, at the moment we are seeing a certain calm on the front line in Ukraine. This is due to the fact that the enemy suffers serious losses both in personnel and in equipment. The strengthening and the developing of the army of reliable security for our country have been and remain our absolute priority, taking into account new challenges, and of course the invaluable experience of conducting the special military operation. We will continue to develop the armed forces. The most important task here is the development of the nuclear triad, which is a key guarantee of Russia's military security and global stability.
And now we have a second short break coming up. But before, we invite you to visit our YouTube channel at TeleSUR English, where you will be able to rewatch our interviews, top stories, special broadcastings, and more. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell to stay up to date on the world's most recent events. We have a final short break. Don't go away. Welcome back. A deadly Israeli drone attack hit a vehicle in the northern West Bank in a new escalation of attacks on the occupied Palestinian territory. Palestinian security sources and eyewitnesses said an Israeli army reconnaissance drone struck near Al-Jalama, a village north of Jenin, killing at least 3 Palestinians in the car. The 3 young men were identified as Mohammed Bashar Awais, Suyab Adnan Al-Ghul, and Asraf Murad Zahari. Meanwhile, the Civil Defense of the Palestinian Authority said in a statement that its crews arrived at the scene and put out the flames of fire and found the bodies of the 3 young men. Likewise, it also said that the Israeli Defense Forces prevented the civil defense crew from taking the bodies and also prevented the ambulances of the Palestinian Red Crescent Society from taking the bodies from the burned car. Khartoum and other Sudanese cities were the scene of heavy fighting, including gun battles and air and artillery attacks between the army and the paramilitary rapid support forces following the end of a 72-hour truce on Wednesday. Residents in Khartoum reported an upsurge in clashes, as well as army fighter raids of paramilitary positions in the south and west of the capital. Meanwhile, local reports indicate that the Wadi Zidna airbase, controlled by the army, was the target of intense artillery bombardment, while violent clashes were taking place in the neighborhood of Fetia and Al-Mohanezin in the capital. In the conflict in Sudan has caused the internal and external displacement of more than 2 million people, according to the United Nations agencies, a figure that adds to the 3.7 million internally displaced people already in the country. And the World Health Organization's Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said he is deeply concerned about the health situation in Sudan, where fighting between the country's warring generals resumed on Wednesday, just minutes after the latest U.S. and Saudi brokered ceasefire expired.
Now to Sudan, where 2 months of violence have severely impacted the delivery of health services, leaving 11 million people in need of health assistance. About 2/3 of health facilities in affected areas are out of service. Repeated attacks on health facilities, medical warehouses, ambulances, and health workers are preventing patients and health workers from reaching hospitals. WHO has verified 46 attacks on healthcare since the start of the fighting. There are significant challenges in controlling ongoing epidemics of measles, malaria, and dengue in Sudan. The risk of epidemics will only increase given the upcoming rainy season. Limited access to safe water, population displacement, and limited capacity to detect outbreaks early.
Similarly, Tedros referred to the WHO's appeal for funding to help and meet the health needs of both Sudan and the neighboring countries that have received thousands of refugees escaping the conflict.
Last week, WHO released a new funding appeal requesting $150 million to meet increasing health needs of the people affected by violence in Sudan and those who have fled to the neighboring Central African Republic, Chad, Egypt, Ethiopia, and South Sudan. I'm deeply concerned for the health and well-being of the people of Sudan, and WHO is exploring all avenues for providing the support they need.
And one of the 30 suspects arrested along with Kenyan cult leader Paul Mackenzie for the deaths of more than 300 people who were told to starve themselves to death if they wanted to go to heaven died in custody. The deceased had been in police custody for more than 60 days as Kenyan Judicial Police investigators continue their research and the exhumation of bodies in the Chakahola forest outside Malindi, where police discovered the first bodies in April. On Wednesday, Ugandan military said it has rescued 3 of the 6 students who were kidnapped by rebel fighters when they stormed a school in the west of the country last week, massacring 42 people. On Friday night, fighters from the Allied Democratic Forces, the ADF, a group linked to the ISIS, stormed the Lubriria Secondary School in Mupunde on Uganda's border with the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The rebels entered a boys' dormitory, shot at the children, and set the building on fire, incinerating nearly everyone in it. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.